স্যার আমার অ্যাকাউন্ট ওই ক্লাসটা রেকর্ড করে রাখার জন্য, পরে যদি
ও,
কিছু মিস হয়ে যায়।
I think all of you are in the hostel, no?
হ্যাঁ স্যার, শুধু অর্ঘ্য হচ্ছে যে বাড়িতে আছে, তবে ও বলছিল জয়েন করবে। এবার দেখি।
অভিরাজ, নয়ন এরা বোধহয় এখনো জয়েন করেনি। এদেরকে বলেছো? আর্য, এদেরকে বলেছো?
হ্যাঁ 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 হ্যাঁ, দাঁড়ান এক্ষুনি একবার ওদেরকে তাও একবার ফোন করছি।
স্যার ওদিকে ঝড় হচ্ছে নাকি?
হ্যাঁ স্যার, অভিরাজ আসছে, ও একটা ফোনে ছিল।
হ্যাঁ, অভিরাজ has joined. Okay, all right. Let me begin. So, we are done with our reading of She Stoops to Conquer. Now, if you just want me to discuss it in some more detail, then you can ask me to do that. But for the time being, I just want to begin with Swift. That is your major, which is part of your major two. Gulliver's Travels Book 4 is there in your syllabus. So I hope you have already familiarized yourself with the literary career of Swift because you have had Swift in your very first semester. You have done the first book of his Gulliver's Travels. Um, so, would you like me to introduce you to Swift, or shall I begin with the text itself?
স্যার
বলো, রাজস্বী কি বলছো? Am I audible?
ইয়েস স্যার, ইউ আর।
ইয়েস স্যার, শুনতে পাচ্ছি।
হ্যাঁ, তুমি কিছু বলছিলে রাজস্বী, বলো।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ স্যার, বলছি যে ব্রিফলি একটু বললে ভালো হয়।
ও, সুইফটকে নিয়ে একটু বললে ভালো হতো। Uh, so basically, if you just think about Swift's literary career, then that career is something which is coterminous with the entire, period of restoration and restoration. That is, a political way of taking the name of the period, and then the neoclassical period itself. That is to say, the period from 1660 to 1750, roughly saying. So as you know, that Swift was born in 1667, so 7 years after the Restoration, and he was a senior to Alexander Pope and very much active during the late years of 17th century, and obviously he was producing a lot of writings in 18th century, and this particular work with which we are concerned, that was published in the year 1726. And one thing which you need to keep in your mind in this regard is that this is often regarded to be one of the early novels in English. Whether this is a novel or not, that is a debatable question, but this is one of the early works in English which are which are capable of having this name tagged against them, that this is a novel. As you know that 1719 is the year of the publication of Robinson Crusoe. Robinson Crusoe is at times regarded to be the first English novel. Again, the debate is there. And Pamela was published in 1741, which is again called by some critics to be the first English novel. So, but we are not going to read it as a novel. And in fact, another problem regarding this is that this text is part of your paper called Interregnum, of your paper, which is on interregnum and restoration. But this novel itself doesn't belong to that particular period. But what is important to be noted is that this period critiques and satirizes in detail, but in an allegorical manner, obviously, the period of the Restoration, the manners, the court proceedings during that particular period of time. And from your reading of the very first book, you have perhaps come to know to an extent about that. And now, Jonathan Swift, where was he born? Any idea? If you have that in your mind, you can just come up with the answer. Otherwise, if you're just going for a Google search, then it would not do. Any idea that where was he born?
Irish.
Yes, he was Irish, and he was born in Dublin. And Dublin is very, famously associated with a number of literary figures. Like you're perhaps familiar with, you have heard of James Joyce, and James Joyce is very famous for his short story collection called Dubliners, in which he's talking about stories which are set in the city of Dublin. And don't forget that Ireland was very much facing the problem of English domination, and a protest of that is something which you will find in a number of 19th century texts as well. Now, Swift is primarily known as a satirist, and this particular text is something which is included in your syllabus as a satire. But what kind of a satire? A prose satire. And you were dealing with verse satires as well. Alexander Pope is perhaps the high priest of verse satires during the neoclassical period. So Jonathan Swift was born in Dublin in 1667. And if you think about his um, he received an MA from Oxford University in 1692. So that is about his education, and he published a number of satirical prose pieces like The Battle of the Books, for example, and which was published in the year 1704. And then another book by him is also very famous in this, which is also a satire, A Tale of a Tub. And as you know, that Gulliver's Travels was published in the year 1726. That is also a satire, but these satires are very much in prose. And Swift was, as you have already come to know about the Scribblerus Club, Swift was part of that Scribblerus Club, and he was part of this group which was consisted of people like Alexander Pope and Dr. Arbuthnot, John Gay, such figures from this particular period. So he was very much part of the literary circle of that particular period. But there, one thing which you need to note is that he was not only writing prose pieces, prose satires, um, and these are very much fictional. And he was also writing non-fictional works. Say, for example, this particular work is very famous, which is which is mentioned in your syllabus, but not to be taken up. A Modest Proposal of 1729, which is a serious sort of a satire. If you just go through it, you will get to realize that
স্যার
this is almost canon. Yes.
এটাও কি ওই আইরিশ অপোজিশনের কনটেক্সটার মধ্যে ফিট করছে, লাইক দ্য অপোজিশন টুয়ার্ডস ইংল্যান্ড?
To an extent. To an extent, yes. And if you read Modest Proposal, then Modest Proposal is one of the best examples of what we call Swiftian satire. Swiftian satire is something which is hugely inspired by Juvenalian mode of writing satire. I have already, I talked about this. There are 3-4 ways of writing satire. The Horatian satire, Juvenalian satire, Menippean or Veronian satire. But Menippean and Veronian satires are those satires which are generally written in prose. So you can call Swift to be that kind of a satirist. But at the same time, if you just think about the kind of sharp attack he is making, if you just think about the kind of cruelty with which he is castigating certain norms, then you will feel that this is very much Juvenalian. So this is very dark. This is very scathing. That is to say, it is very sharp, and this kind of satire is generally called Swiftian satire, though obviously following the name of Swift. Now, in Modest Proposal, basically it is proposed that if there is scarcity of food, then why don't you take up the babies as your food? So, this is almost cannibalistic, as you can understand. But by means of applying this kind of a satire, mode of satire, he is trying to suggest something else. So the critique of the then society, critique of the society in which he lived his life, is something which you will find in almost all the satirical writings he has produced. Now, this is about his prose writing. So he was writing fictional prose, which are very much satirical. He was writing non-fictional prose. Say, for example, Rapier Letters. If you just search for his literary career on, if you familiarize yourself with his books, then there are such writings, and he was also contributing to some periodicals as well. That is something which I request you to familiarize yourself. And along with that, you know what? He was also a poet. He was writing poetry. Um, Interestingly, if you just want to read any poetic composition by Jonathan Swift, then you can read the kind of verse obituary he wrote. Obituary, that is, what is an obituary?
So it is
স্যার
an
কোনো
article.
ডেট, কোনো একটা ডেট ফ্রেন্ডের জন্য? না না না, আমি ভুল বলছি
হ্যাঁ,
probably.
হ্যাঁ, ওটাই মানে if someone has died and you were basically writing an obituary in memory of that
ও
person.
আচ্ছা আচ্ছা আচ্ছা।
So Swift has written obituary of himself. So before
স্যার
dying,
উনি
he wrote an
শুধু ওইটাও
obituary.
তো নয়, উনি ওই আইজ্যাক বিকাস্টফ নাম দিয়ে একটা
হ্যাঁ,
জ্যোতিষী
ওটা
ছিল যে হচ্ছে ওর পাওয়ারটাকে অ্যাবিউজ করতো, তার নামে ওরকম করে লিখে
হ্যাঁ,
দিয়েছিলেন।
লিখে দিয়েছিল বটেই, বটেই। আহ, and along with that, there were some, আমার এখন এই মুহূর্তে আমার কাছে নেই বলে আমি তোমাকে বলতে পারছি না, that he was, in fact, if you just think about his verses, he um, can be, can be regarded to be some sort of a uh, poet who has got inspired a lot by Alexander Pope, because Pope's way of satirization is something which at times, but he's not that good a poet like Pope. Say, for example, the dressing, if I'm not mistaken, if you just take for it that he wrote this the dressing room of a maiden, or dressing room of a beauty, or something like that. So basically he's talking about dressing room of a belle, Belle, that a girl. And there too, his scathing satire is something which you will notice. And this is something which will remind you, obviously, of the first canto, or the last section of the first canto of Alexander Pope's The Rip of the Lock, because you know that Belinda is basically dressing up, preparing herself. So again, this is also part of the way he has written in satirical modes. That is, he has also contributed to the development of prose satire, to the verse satire. He has contributed to different periodicals, and as you have rightly pointed out, that he wrote under this pseudonym. It is at times asked as a question that what was the pseudonym under which Swift wrote. That was Isaac Bickerstaff. Now, I just ask you to, take a look at this particular, which I have already mentioned. Just I'm giving you the title of it. Yes. So Swift, you know what, that is towards the end of his life, he was going through some psychological problems, and obviously this is something which is because that kind of a treatment was not available during those days. Okay, just another thing which I would like to point out is that is obviously his death. He died in the year 1745. and he is obviously one of the famous Irish writers. If you just think about the list of the Irish writers who have contributed to the development of English literature at large, you will find Jonathan Swift. Then someone like W.B. Yeats is there in 20th century, and in 19th century you have someone like Oscar Wilde. These are the famous Irishmen who have contributed to the development of English literature. Now he died in the year 1745. Swift died in the year 1745. When did Pope die? I just want an instant answer. Don't go for a Google search, please. Do you recall the year of death of Alexander Pope?
স্যার ভুলে গেছি।
ভুলে গেছে। 1744 is his year of death, and so he died in the following year. And Swift was a very close friend to Alexander Pope. So that's an overview of the life and career of literary career of Jonathan Swift. So many things are there to be talked about in this regard, but obviously, I have to be brief. Now, 2-3 things which I need to point out before entering into the text itself, though I think that I would not have that much time to deal with the text in detail. If you just think about the novel, should I call this a novel or the text, then this can be taken up to be a comedy in prose. It's comic because when you read, because satire is that kind of thing that it will make you laugh at something and then would ask for some sort of a correction, would laugh at your follies and foibles. But the particular mode of allegory which is employed by Swift, that is something which is interesting, which you have already come to know perhaps from your reading of the first book. The mode of comedy as applied by Swift, that is his style of writing. Gulliver's Travel can also be regarded to be a novel in the sense that it gives you a story. So number of stories. So in 4 books, a number of stories, and you have a particular sort of a development of that story, but you don't have a development of the character as such. And the central character being Lemuel Gulliver, he's not developing. He's basically experiencing and observing certain things and talking about them. So basically, as from the title, you have already got to know that this is a travel narrative, and very much imaginary travel narrative. Now this thing is particularly of interest to us for one particular reason, that if you just think about the expansion of the empire during the 18th century, because the 1775 not 1775 but 1757 is the year of Palashi Juddho, and then the development of the Company Raj and things like that. But prior to that, several other colonies have already been established by a number of British not British but European powers. And about from your reading of Renaissance, this discovery of the new places and founding a new land, and these things were going on. So it is almost that Gulliver is also experiencing those new lands, and he's articulating his memory, and that memory, out of that memory, you have this entire book. So the development of travelogue during that particular period is something which is important. If you, I don't know whether you are familiar with this figure called Lady Mary Rothley Montagu. This lady was also traveling to a
আমরা
number of places.
পড়েছি ওনার পোয়েম।
আচ্ছা, So she was also traveling, and you have some collections. So I'm not getting those details right now, so I have to revisit those things. Just I wanted to mention it. But if you just think about the Indian travelogues during that period, that 18th century, you have someone called Din Muhammad, who is the first travelogue writer from the canon of Indian writings in English, and that travelogue was a production of the late 18th century. And Swift is situated in the early 18th century, and 1726 is the year of the publication of this particular book. And this text can also be read as a work of children's literature, because this is, and a number of cartoon versions are available, which you have perhaps got to see. So that's there. And another thing, yes, the satire is something which I have already pointed out to you, that you please be careful while reading the text, that you were going through it as a satire, because satire was a dominant mode of writing during that particular period of time. Pope was writing verse satire. You have John Dryden writing a number of verse satires, and you have Swift. So Swiftian sort of a satire. Now, when you were dealing with a satire, then one of the literary devices, or perhaps the literary device which you need to be careful of is. Hello. Which literary
Yes, sir.
device is which literary device is prominent in the field of satire?
Irony?
Sir, irony.
Yes, yes, absolutely so. Irony. So irony is used as a tool throughout the novel. Um, as you, I don't need to tell you what is an irony, but in a number of cases you will find that, and this is something which I ask you to be mindful of while reading and rereading the text. And another thing in this regard, which allegory is the mode of allegory. What is an allegory, by the way? Just tell me what you understand by the term
Sir,
allegory.
metaphor type.
Yes, metaphor type.
Like it alludes to something. It alludes to a
Yes,
symbol.
it alludes to something. So basically, okay, are you? I think you have familiarized yourself with the literary works of John Dryden, and one of his works being Absalom and Achitophel, which was published in the year 1681. If you just collect a bit of information about that particular work, then you will get to know that that is basically talking about the contemporary period, the kind of trouble which is in front of the king regarding the regarding who is going to be the next ruler of England, and that is something which is satirically told in the form of verse by John Dryden using biblical characters. So he is taking recourse to a biblical story in order to convey the condition of the present situation. So Gulliver is also talking about the Lilliput. So Gulliver is also down a second. So can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes, are you
sir.
following?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Acha, acha, acha. So Gulliver is talking about the Lilliputs, the tiny human beings, and then the Brobding Naggins, the gigantic bodies of them, and the intelligent Houyhnhnms in the fourth book with which we are concerned. Then these are basically, that he is basically by taking recourse to some sort of a metaphor or a lengthy metaphor, an allegory. He is talking about the kind of situation he has lived through in England, the condition of court in England, or the condition of the society of which he was a part
Sir,
during those
Orgo,
days.
একবার স্যার ইন্টারাপ্ট করছি, অর্ঘ আপনাকে অ্যাড করতে বলছে।
অর্ঘ্য অ্যাড করতে বলছে। আচ্ছা,
অর্ঘ না
yes,
ওয়েটিং এ আছে।
yes. So yes, that's what so I was saying that um, that the kind of satire he was sort of inflicting upon that society he was living by means of taking recourse to this device of allegory, uh, and this is something which you need to take note of. And along with that, another thing which I need to mention is the device of grotesque. Have you heard of this term, grotesque?
Yes, sir.
What does that mean?
It's basically very graphic, like bloody, gore, and stuff.
Okay, bloody gore. Okay. So, you know, um, you will find that Gulliver's Travels is such a narrative which thrives on the aesthetic device of the grotesque. Grotesque is something which originated during the Renaissance. You just visit your Abrams, and there you will certainly find an entry on grotesque. So, grotesque is a form where everything is strange. You know, something very much strange, something which is very awkward, weird, which is not normal, something which, this is again, I'm simplifying, abnormal. Now, in Renaissance, you will find a number of grotesques. Say, for example, that if you, I know you were familiar with John Webster, and John Webster is particularly known for his play The Duchess of Malfi, in which you have Duchess who is pregnant, and her body is going through some sort of a transformation, which is also some sort of a grotesque, that it is growing in to be abnormal, which is not the normal condition. So this is a slight or what should I say? Well, a simple way of talking about grotesque, but it is very much nuanced. Now, that Renaissance thing apart, I just want to talk about grotesque as you have already noticed in the case of the Lilliputians, in the case of the Brobdingnagians, the Lilliputians and the gigantic bodies of the Brobdingnagians. So this is the disproportionate shape of them is something which is which can be thought of as a representation of grotesque. So Lilliputians are tiny and their bodies are not normal, and Brobdingnagians, if their body parts are just excessive. And if you have already familiarized yourself with the fourth book, I hope. In the case of the Houyhnhnms, what you notice that um, uh, that um, that they are highly intelligent, and they are like the horses, and the yahoos are like the humans who are actually more like animals. So this sort of an alteration and the disproportionate changes which Swift has made, these are the part of the application on his part of the aesthetic device of grotesque. And that is something which I ask you to note. Now, I think we need to read a bit from the text. And there are several other things are there which I need to point out in this case. Um, uh, that what you have noticed, two, three more things which I just like to mention to you as some points which you need to be mindful of while reading the text. Another thing is that. There is if you just think about the satires, how is the device of satire employed and what is the purpose. So the one of the purposes of applying this device of satire is criticizing the moral degradation. That is something which you have already noticed while reading the Restoration playwrights as well, and obviously with our reading of She Stoops to Conquer. And then what you notice is that Swift is continuously satirizing the culture of appearance. And in your reading of Alexander Pope, you will find that in the milieu of the society to which Belinda belongs, the appearance is something which is of utmost importance. So the size is something which is very much important, and you will notice that. Uh, when he is with the Brobdingnags, that is large, gigantic beings, Swift, or not Swift, but Gulliver is saying that he is just like a cockroach to them. And to the Brobdingnags, he is just like a Lilliput himself. And this is something which is basically satirizing the culture of appearance, that you are dressing yourself up, or you are basically designing yourself up in such a way which is not your actual shape and size. And this was something which was happening in those days, because the kind of fashion which was um, borrowed by this particular society from France, from Italy, and they were basically indulging in such appearances. And this appearance as a trope is something which you will find in a number of restoration plays, in the plays by Goldsmith and Sheridan as well. So they're very much concerned and consciously concerned with this sense of dressing themselves up in a particular way. So this is one thing. And then another thing which you notice is that this purpose of applying this device of satire is also to criticize, to satirize the power. As you know that Swift is also suggesting that power is something which leads you to corruption. And the political corruption during those days is something which you have perhaps noticed. And the kind of prime ministers which England was having during those days, they were very much corrupt. You are familiar with the name of Robert, so Horace Walpole. Horace Walpole is known for his Gothic novel, The Castle
Gothic
of
novels.
Otranto. Yes, Gothic novel Castle of Otranto. And who was his father? His father was Robert Walpole, the British Prime Minister, who was, just corrupt, was sunk in corruption from top to bottom. And a critique of that is something which you notice but in a very indirect way in these works. Now, another thing regarding the satire is that it's satirizing knowledge. That is something which you will find in the third book to an extent. That in the third book, if you just think about the his in third book, what you have is the journey to Laputa, and Laputans are brilliant at theoretical mathematics. They are doing so basically what will we do with your brilliance in theoretical mathematics if you don't have a practical application of that? And don't forget that I have talked at least in briefly about the Enlightenment rationality, that this is also the age of prose and reason. This is the age of enlightenment, and knowledge is something which is highly regarded. Now, but what would you do with that theoretical knowledge if you don't have a practical application of that? So something which is happening with the Laputans, and that is something which you'll find in the third book of this third book of this novel. The Laputans worry about when the sun will burn out, and whether it will crash into the earth, or these things like that. So in enlightenment, just think about your Locke, think about other figures in the domain of philosophy. So they are in a sense satirized by the knowledge, that knowledge system which was basically taking ground during that period, is something which is satirized by Swift. And this satirization is something which continues in the fourth book as well, because if you just think about the Houyhnhnms, they are full of knowledge, and their manners are something which are admired to an extent by Swift, not by Swift, but Gulliver. And Yahoos presented in contradiction to them. And Yahoos are, as you have already come to know, that Yahoos resemble the human beings rather than the Houyhnhnms. Then another thing which I have just suggested, that you just be mindful of the kind of journeys in different places, say places of Asia and Africa, which these travelers, these sailors were undertaking during that particular period of time. Now, that sense of travel is something which I ask you to note, and discovery. Renaissance was also the period of discovery. You discover a number of lands, and Gulliver is also traveling to such lands like the Laputa and the place of the Lilliputians, and such names are there. Names are also very odd to memorize. Now. Another this is a production of his imagination, and that imagination is something which you also have to admire. We have to learn to appreciate. Now, this narrative is at times suggested by a number of critics to be an anti-conquest. Anti-conquest in the sense that, as you will find in Robinson Crusoe, that is Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, that Robinson Crusoe is perhaps conquering a particular land, and Friday, who is a native, has become his servant. And this is not something which you'll find in Gulliver's Travels. Gulliver is not conquering a particular land. He is not he's not in a particular land to conquer, to declare his conquest. Rather, he's just is just visiting and experiencing and being part of that and trying to experience it. So uh, from that perspective, this can be talked about as an anti-conquest narrative, because if you just think about other narratives which were there during that particular time, the Ferdinand Magellan and some others from other countries of Europe, how they were basically conquering different parts, discovering different parts. So this is a discovery, but that discovery is not leading to a conquest. And that if you just think about the European colonialism, that you discover a particular Columbus discovered America, but who was requesting him to discover that particular land? And if you don't even discover that, was it not does that mean that it was not existing? So it was very much existing, and that indifference regarding conquest is something which you will find in this particular text. Now, yes, I just don't want to go on like this, because these are some of the things which I just want you to be mindful of. Now, another thing which you have already come to know from your reading of the Renaissance is the idea of utopia. So utopia is basically an imaginary place, a no man's land, a no place, a place which is not actually existing. And utopia of Thomas More is something which you are very much familiar with. Now, this novel is perhaps satirizing that mode of finding a utopia, because if you just think about the kind of lands which are visited by Gulliver, they are not the lands which are marked by any sense of perfection. Rather, they are very, they are places with their odds and evens. So that is another thing which you can think of from your reading of one of the possibilities which you can think of from your reading of this particular book. And then several other things are there which I need to talk about. Now, two important things which I need to mention to you, and they are that the idea of the individual and the family. If you just think of, because individual was someone who was to be prioritized, and individual freedom is something which is to be prioritized. Now, Gulliver's entire narrative can be seen as a sort of a masculine fantasy, so to say, because he is always going away from his family, and he has a wife and he has children. Now, he has just left them, and the woman is completely marginalized in Swift's description of the family. So it is very much male centric, or androcentric, what you call androcentric, that's male centric and male dominated. So that uh, you have noticed perhaps this while reading the fourth book, that in the society of the Houyhnhnms, that women and property were to be communally owned, that is collectively owned. And so there is no individuality which is allowed to the women. So this, if you just think about the Swiftian mode of satire, that is something which is very much misogynist in a sense. If you just think about Pope, Pope has his personal reasons. Swift has his personal reasons, which you can take a look at. Now, this is almost a masculine fantasy, which is escaping from family and domesticity, and you have these satires which are cast in a sense against, not exactly against, but to an extent, against women. Another thing, I don't know whether you were familiar with this term, and this is called excremental vision. So you will find at a number of places that human excreta is something which is mentioned, and Swift is perhaps notorious for that. So he takes a great deal of interest in bodily functions. He detailed expositions and images of cannibalistic consumption, excessive feeding, which he will, so the body is central to Swift. And at times bodies are larger, bodies are smaller. That nothing to be told about, nothing to be told. You have already come to know. So this is called Swiftian excremental vision. And this can also be registered as a form of social criticism. Because the society, the sanitation, the hygiene, which are not that much taken care of, and Swift, in his own manner, is in hinting to that, to such things in his allegorical narrative. So these are some of the things. These are some of the things which I uh, ask you to be, please be to be mindful of. And so Swiftian satire of the humankind, and Swift's obsession with the ugly, the body, that is the real body. So you have a realistic portrayal of that body, which you don't find in the case of other writers. Say, for example, Pope. At times, it is very much fashion. What do you call? It is very much portrayed as perfection. The perfection of body is something which you will find in the romantic writings as well. Say, for example, some graphics. Some paintings by William Blake. I hope you have seen this painting called Newton with a compass in his hand. The perfect body is something which is portrayed by William Blake. That is towards the end of this very century, that is 18th century. So these are the things which you need to be mindful of, but particularly of the satire, because satire is the dominant mode, and you are taking this particular work we are taking this particular work up as a prose satire, which is, and this satire is very much situated within the society of which Swift was a part. Have you followed? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so now what to do? Should I begin reading?
I don't think, sir, I don't think you would be able to suffice that with your time. I think we should take a cursory look at all the chapters and move on. That's the only viable option we have, realistically speaking.
No, I don't think that I would even be able to cursorily look at all the chapters, because you have 12 chapters.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't think line by line is a viable option, or even a cursory look.
But at least let me begin reading a bit. And it would appear to you to be boring if I just read line by line. That is also something which you would not tolerate. Part 4 of the book or this is book 4. This is at times called book 4 and part 4 of the novel. Voyage to the country of the Houyhnhnms. Please be careful of the spelling of Houyhnhnms. স্পেলিং ভুলটা যেন পরীক্ষায় করো না, যেমন করার একটা প্রবণতা থাকে এখানে। যাকে So chapter 1, and as you have already come to know, this book 4 is divided into 12 chapters. And chapter 1 begins like this. So basically, the author sets out as a captain of ship. So earlier he was basically a traveler, and now he's captain of the ship. I continued at home with my wife and children about 5 months in a very happy condition. If I could have learned the lesson of knowing when I was well, I left my poor wife big with child and accept. Look, এখানে অনেক কিছু বলার হতে পারে। The way he said that I left my poor wife big with a child and accepted an advantageous offer made me to be captain of the adventure. So basically, leaving the wife in the household and going for his journey. A stout merchantman of 350 tons, for I understood navigation well, and being grown weary of a surgeon's employment at sea, which, however, I could exercise upon occasion, I took a skilful young man of that calling, one Robert Purefoy, into my ship. We set sail from Portsmouth upon the 7th day of September 1710. So particular date is mentioned. It is almost like a diary. On the 14th, we met with Captain Pocock of Bristol at Tenerife, who was going to be the Bay of Campsie to cut logwood, and it goes on like that. And then a little later, he was an honest man and a good sailor, but a little too positive in his own opinions, which was the cause of his destruction, as it has been with several others. For if he had followed my advice, he might have been safe at home with his family at this time. And it goes on like this. Just I wanted to begin reading the text, and I believe that you have already read or perhaps reading, and you should be careful in your reading of this text. Now I just want to read the the last portion of this particular book, particular chapter, that is the first chapter of the fourth book. I could frequently distinguish the word Yahoo, which was repeated by each of them several times, and although it was impossible for me to conjecture what it meant, yet while the two horses were busy in conversation. The two horses are two Houyhnhnms. I endeavored to practice this word upon my tongue, and as soon as they were silent, I boldly pronounced Yahoo in a loud voice, imitating at the same time, as near as I could, the neighing of a horse, at which they were both visibly surprised, and the grey repeated the same word twice, as if he meant to teach me the right accent, wherein I spoke after him as well as I could, and found myself perceivably to improve every time, though very far from any degree of perfection. Then the bay tried me with a second word, much harder to be pronounced, but reducing it to the English orthography may be spelled thus. So in English, the spelling is like this: Huinim. This is pronounced as Huinim, but I don't know why and how. I did not succeed in this so well as in the former, but after 2 or 3 further trials, I had better fortune, and they both appeared amazed at my capacity. After some further discourse, which I then conjectured might relate to me, the two friends took their leaves with the same compliment of the striking each other's hoof, and the grey made me signs that I should walk before him. So another land, another place, he is excavating. And the grey made me signs that I should walk before him, wherein I thought it prudent to comply till I could find a better director. When I offered to slacken my pace, he would cry, I don't know how to pronounce this, Hoon, and something like that. I guessed his meaning and gave him to understand as well as I could that I was weary and not able to walk faster, upon which he would stand while to let me rest. So this is the first chapter, but one thing which to which I would like to draw your attention is that look at the way it is written. It's almost like the diary of a traveler who is basically giving the entries of his experiences. So that is one thing, and the narrative is very much in first person, because this is travelogue, and travelogue is basically written in that way that you are very much subjective. That subjective individual, that one individual who is at the center of the text is so this is very much anthropocentric. Are you familiar with this term anthropocentric? You are. I hope you are.
Yes, yes, we are.
You are. So, and so look at this anthropocentrism, which is something which we have traced down the Renaissance, and so at the center, but not even anthropocentric, but rather, let me rectify that this is very much androcentric, because at the center you have a human being who is male by gender, and he is basically describing his journey. So um, but along with that, I don't know whether people have discussed this novel in this way or not, but basically, the travel which he is undertaking is made by means of journeying through the seas. So this is overseas journey. And so just think about the interaction of that individual with the sea, which is larger part of nature. So this is another way I'm trying to think of the novel. The ordinary ways, or the ways in which it is basically thought, I have already suggested. Now, just thinking of in an offbeat manner, just think about how it is basically concerned with the sea, because without the sea, you just cannot have your travel. I'm just instigating you to think in that line, and that particular human individual, or the animals, or the beings of other shapes who are of importance, but not that particular nature. So. Uh, that sea which gives you to experience such odd things, that is also capable of taking your life. So the kind of odd relationship which you share with the sea, and along with that, overcoming that odd relationship, you get to experience something which is unprecedented, something which is new, something which is even weird, something which is very much awkward to that particular person. So this is another way I'm just trying to think aloud about the text. And if you find any interest, I would be happy, because this is not the usual way of thinking of the text. Now, um, the second chapter is uh, that you have author's deception, and the food of the Houyhnhnms is something which is described. And then his manner of feeding in his country. So the manner of feeding in the country from which he came, and the kind of let's say table manners which you will find in this particular country, that is the country of the Houyhnhnms. And is it the country of the Yahoos? So another thing which you need to note in this regard is that Houyhnhnms are the masters and Yahoos are under their control. So that master-slave dialectic is something which is functional here too. So as if you can say that the Houyhnhnms are the colonizers, that Houyhnhnms have colonized the Yahoos. So here you have an alternative picture. So this is an alterity in a sense that the Yahoos, who are like the human beings in their shape and size, they are controlled and dominated by Houyhnhnms, who are like the horses, and they are much more intelligent. So what you have here is that you have an alternative, or you have something, ইউটোপিয়া। আমার একটা কথা, আমি জানি না এটা আমার কেন এখন মনে পড়ছে। সো আচ্ছা, একটা কথা বলো, আমি এটা একটু বাংলায় ভাবতে চাইছি, শুনছো তো আমার কথা?
Yes,
হ্যালো?
sir. Yes, sir.
হ্যাঁ
হ্যাঁ
স্যার,
স্যার,
হ্যাঁ
হ্যাঁ
স্যার।
সেটা হচ্ছে গিয়ে, মানে তুমি যদি ইউটোপিয়ার কথাটার কথা চিন্তা করো, সো ইউটোপিয়া, দ্যাট ইজ নো প্লেস। আমি যদি বলি যে ইউটোপিয়া মানে এরকমও হতে পারে যে আ প্লেস হুইচ ইজ জাস্ট ইন কন্ট্রাডিকশন টু দিস প্লে, আমি জানি না, আমি প্রথম বলছি না, আগেও অনেকে হয়তো বলেছে। সেটা হচ্ছে গিয়ে যে আ প্লেস হুইচ ইজ জাস্ট ইন কন্ট্রাডিকশন টু দ্য প্লেস ইন হুইচ উই আর ইনহেবিটিং, দ্য place with which we are familiar. So just try to connect the dots that Huinims are controlling the Yahoos, so human beings are controlled by the animals, and that is almost utopia in the sense that is a land which is discovered, which is found by Gulliver, but discovered within inverted commas, and that is a place in which something which is in contradiction to is happening, in contradiction to the kind of society or to the kind of happenings which Gulliver is familiar with. সো এটাকে আমরা বলতে পারি যে ইউটোপিয়া মানে একটা এমন স্থান যেখানে সবকিছু ভালো, সবকিছু ঠিক, সবকিছু সুন্দর, সেরকমটা নয়, ঠিক এমনটা যেটা এটা নয়, মানে এটা ঠিক বিপরীত। আমরা এইভাবে কিন্তু ভাবি না, আমরা ভাবি যে দ্যাট ইট ইজ সামথিং হুইচ ইজ নট দিস, হুইচ ইজ নো প্লেস, বাট হোয়াট অ্যাবাউট ইট ইজ জাস্ট আ প্লেস in contradiction to this, that is something which is being found, perhaps I'm complicating the things, so that is something which is found out by Gulliver. So you can think in that line as well. So I'm just trying to give you some ideas which you can ponder upon. Now, uh, now this is in the second chapter. About noon, I saw coming towards the house a kind of vehicle drawn like a sledge by 4 Yahoos. So Yahoos are basically the servants. There was in it an old steed who seemed to be of quality. He alighted with his hind feet forward, having by accident got hurt, and it goes on like this. And then I happened to wear my globes, which the master grey, observing, seemed perplexed, discovering signs of wonder what I had done to my 4 feet. He put his hoop 3 or 4 times to them, as if he would signify that I should reduce them to their former shape, which I presently did, pulling off both my globes and putting them into my pocket. So look at the kind of manners, or the kind of mismatch, or which kind of oddity he is, because this is a strange place, this odd place which with which Gulliver is interacting. um, this is the master horse observed by my behavior and therefore sent the Yahoo back, and it goes on like this. Now, now, about their description of the food, I think this is here. I toasted at the fire and eat warm with milk. It was at first a very insipid diet, though common enough in many parts of Europe, but grew tolerable by time. And having been often reduced to hard fare in my life, this was not the first experiment I had made how easily nature is satisfied. And I cannot but observe that I never had 1 hour's sickness while I stayed in this island. It is true I sometimes made a shift to catch a rabbit or bird by springs made of Yahoo's hairs, and I often gathered wholesome herbs which I boiled and ate as salads with my bread. And now and then, for a rarity, I made a little butter and drank the whey. I was at first at a great loss for salt, but custom soon reconciled me to the want of it, and I am confident that the frequent use of salt among us is an effect of luxury. So this point is something interesting. I am confident that the frequent use of salt among us is an effect of luxury, and was first introduced only as a prerogative to drink, except where it is necessary for preserving flesh in long voyages or in places remote from great markets. For you observe no animal to be fond of it but man. And as to myself, when I left this country, it was a great while before I could endure the taste of it in anything that I ate. This is enough to say upon the subject of my diet, wherewith other travellers fill their books, as if the readers were personally concerned whether we fare well or ill. However, it was necessary to mention this matter. So basically, the food habit, food manner is described, and their luxury with salt. That is also a critic, because this is also about personal like and dislike, but this is also sometimes critic, that critique. of that kind of manners, food manners, or the eating manners, eating etiquettes, which were followed in Europe, as if the readers were personally concerned whether we fare well or ill. However, it was necessary to mention this matter, lest the world should think it was impossible. And it goes on like that. And then, the second chapter comes to an end. I will just wrap up the class by saying that that another thing which I have just pointed out to you again and again, that think about the text which is self-conscious. He's writing a travelogue, he's writing a novel, he's writing a narrative, and the narrative is again self-conscious, because he's saying that he's basically talking talking about talking about the readers as if the readers were personally concerned. So let me not go for further details of the food manners, or what you call eating manners. And so he's basically addressing his readers. So this book is also conceived as a text which is as a novel which is very much conscious, to an extent, not entirely perhaps, of it being a fictional tale, and that tale is something which is told, written, and meant to be consumed by the readers. That is something which is suggested, as you read the second chapter of this section of the book, towards the end of it, as if he is addressing the readers. And then the food manners and again the court manners would be described in subsequent chapters. I will come to that. Perhaps I have to I will meet you tomorrow, obviously, and in that class I will be talking about that. But I just, for the time being, I just want to draw your attention to this particular term. I'm just writing this down. This is called metafiction, and it can be read as a metafiction. Even Moll Flanders, which is a novel by Daniel Defoe, which is part of this very century. Daniel Defoe was writing in early 18th century. Some other works which are produced during that particular period of time, they are very much conscious of their own existence. So this self-reflexivity of the text is something to which I would like to draw your attention, and I would ask you to be a bit careful about that. So that's all for today.
Sir, I had one question. That
Yes.
in what way it is a metafiction? Like which ways?
In which ways? Not in the way in which I'm just trying to suggest it to be a metafiction is that the novel or the text itself is talking about it as a text, as a narrative which is the production of his imagination. So that is the
Oh, I see.
self-consciousness of the text. So basically it
Oh,
is a text, but the text is talked about within the text. Are
yeah,
you
yeah,
getting
yeah.
my point?
Yeah.
And meta is beyond. You recall your metaphysical poetry? Metaphysical, something which is beyond the physical. Okay, that is another thing. But this is beyond fiction in the sense that it's a fictional text, but within that fictional paradigm, within the fictional field, it is talked about as a fiction,
Yeah.
as a text, as something which is product of imagination. And look, addressing the readers, mentioning the readers. Why do we have the readers? If you just
Yeah,
think
yeah.
in that line, then it's like it is making sense to an extent. Yes.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. কালকে কিন্তু কি বলে 3টে থেকে আমরা করার চেষ্টা করব.
Okay, sir.
So let's call it a day.
Yeah, sure, sure, sure.
Hmm.
Subam, the bottom of the wall, Subam.
Hello,